Today we'll be talking about filtration, secretion, and reabsorption. The foundation of kidney function is based on these three things: filtration, secretion, and reabsorption. Each of these processes have a highly specific meaning and function in the kidney. These terms cannot be used interchangeably to describe kidney function, because each term or process is tied to a specific function in the kidney, which we'll talk about throughout this video. In order to envision how these processes interact, let's place them where they are actually occurring along the nephron. It is important to note that an anatomically correct nephron looks like this. But to better understand filtration, secretion, and reabsorption, we will look at the nephron depicted like this. Filtration only will ever occur in the renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle is composed of two anatomical structures. The first is the glomerulus, which is composed of fenestrated capillaries. These are capillaries that act like a strainer with a bunch of little holes. The next is Bowman's capsule. That is the container that catches all the fluid that gets filtered out of the blood. Both these structures are known as the renal corpuscle. This is where fluid is pushed out through the walls of the blood vessels of the glomerulus and into an enclosed container that surrounds the glomerulus, Bowman's capsule. This process is similar to straining pulp out of orange juice. We pour the juice through a fine strainer to catch all the solid pulp contents to end up with just pure orange juice. Similarly, the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule are doing the same thing with the blood in our body. The fluid that we filtered from the blood that is now in Bowman's capsule is known as filtrate. This fluid will continue through the nephron, and if nothing else were to happen to it, it will go straight to the bladder and be excreted or urinated out of the body. It is important to understand why the process of filtration is strictly confined to the renal corpuscle. The reason filtration only occurs at the renal corpuscle is because that is the only place the filtration barrier exists. This filtration barrier is made up of three components. The first barrier is the fenestrated capillary endothelium that makes up the glomerulus. This layer is made up of tiny holes called fenestrae. They are only about 70 nanometers wide. This is important to know because red blood cells are about 7,000 nanometers in size. Knowing this helps us understand that finding blood in the urine is never a good thing, because they shouldn't be able to make it past the fenestrae. So this layer is responsible for preventing large proteins from being filtered. The second barrier is the basement membrane of the fenestrated capillary. It is a porous matrix of negatively charged anchor proteins. This layer is responsible for negatively charged proteins. This barrier is more specific to charges and less about size by preventing small plasma proteins from being filtered. Although, it is important to note that some negative charged things do get filtered, such as bicarb, chloride, and other things, but the goal is to prevent large negative things from being filtered. The last component of filtration are podocytes, which make up the visceral layer of the fenestrated capillary of the glomerulus. These podocytes are finger-like processes that create slits of filtration that add another barrier to the filtration process. These three layers are the filtration barrier. If any substance makes it through this barrier, we say it was filtered. Hence why filtration is strictly reserved for the renal corpuscle, and filtration will never occur anywhere else through the nephron. The second process that is important in the nephron is secretion. Secretion only occurs in the proximal tubule, distal tubule, and collecting duct of the nephron. Secretion occurs when we move a substance in the body from the blood into the nephron's filtrate. This occurs via protein channels between the peritubular capillaries and the nephron. This generally occurs when a specific substance passes through the glomerulus and was not filtered. Secretion is moving a substance from the blood into the nephron tubules. Now, you might be wondering, well, in the glomerulus, we are moving substances from the blood into the nephron as well. So what is the difference between secretion and filtration if they both are moving substances from the blood into the nephron? Well, remember, the glomerulus has the filtration barrier, so when moving from the blood into the nephron, we say filtered. When moving substances from the blood into the nephron, in the proximal tubule, distal tubule, and collecting duct, we do not pass through a filtration barrier. So instead, we're going to say that that substance was secreted. Lastly, reabsorption is when the body takes substances out of the filtrate that's already in the nephron and puts it back into the blood. Filtration filters both good and bad substances out of the blood. This is where reabsorption comes into play. Reabsorption is highly specific and will take all the good substances in the filtrate and put it back into the blood through protein channels, while letting any waste or bad substances continue down to the bladder to get excreted out. It is estimated that only 1% of blood that is filtered actually becomes urine to be excreted out. Reabsorption can happen anywhere throughout the nephron though, except for the renal corpuscle. Remember, the renal corpuscle with the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule is strictly for filtration only. No secretion or reabsorption will happen in there. Thank you so much for watching this video on filtration, secretion, and reabsorption.